guys, it's Sophie. So today I wanted to talk through some of the books I've read so far that are on the Women's Prize long list. I like splitting out my prize reading from my normal wrap-ups because I think it's interesting to go back and have a look and see what you think. I didn't feel like doing individual reviews this year just because my time's a bit short and I feel like doing an individual review would have maybe been too much to commit to. So we're going to run through a few of the books today. The first ones I'm going to go through are ones that I've listened to on audiobooks. I've been doing a lot of audiobook reading throughout March because work has just been really busy, and audiobooks I can do when I'm like cleaning the house, having a shower, cooking, and it's just fitted in a bit better than sitting down and reading. Though I have read an awful lot in March, I don't really know how. I think it's maybe because I had a week off at the beginning of the month. So yeah, we'll start with the ones that I've listened to. So the first one that I listened to I actually already had on my Audible account, and that was Exciting Times by Noise Dolan. And I'd picked this up because I'd seen loads of buzz about it and I was like, yeah, I'll listen to it. I didn't love it, I've got to be honest. I'll talk a little bit about what it's about. Briefly, it is about a young Irish woman who decides she wants to go and live in Hong Kong as an English teacher for students, and she is very alone in the country, doesn't really know anyone, and strikes up a relationship come friendship with a banker from England who is living in Hong Kong too. It reminds me a little bit of Sally Rooney books, but I didn't like it in the same way. The relationship between her and the main male character I was interested in, but I wasn't kind of invested in. And similarly, the character is bisexual and there's a relationship with a female character, and in the same way I was fine to listen to it but didn't feel that invested in the book. I do think primarily this is a book about relationships and a book about connection in a place that's unfamiliar to you, but it's not something necessarily like I would recommend and be like, it was amazing, you definitely need to read it. And I don't think I'll buy the physical copy having listened to it on audiobook, and that normally means I haven't loved it. If I really want a book physically and I've really enjoyed it, I'll nearly always buy a second copy. So that was what I thought of Exciting Times. The next one I listened to was Because of You by Dawn French. This was the one I was least excited for on the prize list, if I'm honest, but I didn't not enjoy it. I think it's definitely not the kind of thing I would have normally picked up. I'm glad I had an Audible credit to spend because I think if I'd have had to buy the physical book I probably wouldn't have. This was a very improbable story about two mothers who give birth in the same hospital on the same day on the 1st of January in the year 2000. And one of the women unfortunately has a stillborn baby, the other woman has a baby who's perfectly healthy. The woman who has the baby who's perfectly healthy has a terrible relationship with a very nasty husband, and the woman whose baby passes away has a very loving relationship with someone that really deeply cares for her. And the kind of main theme of the story is that the woman who's lost her baby steals the child of the other woman. So at this point, any reason or critical thought has to leave your head for you to listen to the rest of the story, because the police do a very cursory examination of whether or not she has a baby, but ultimately no one ever notices that she has this baby. I found it super easy to listen to. It's the kind of thing it's the kind of thing quite a good plain read in terms of there's a story there and it's quite soft and gentle, and you kind of know what's going to happen the whole way through, but it's not enjoyable. So yeah, I mean, if that kind of sounds like your thing, go for it. I'm not going to buy the physical copy of the book, but I actually think I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed Exciting Times, weirdly, just because I don't think Exciting Times did that much for me, whereas Because of You was so novel in the style and the ease of reading, but it kind of felt like quite good fun. I actually did quite a lot of it when I was doing data analysis earlier on in the month whilst I was at work, so that was quite nice to have something to listen to whilst I was doing my work, that if I missed something it didn't really matter because it was slow enough and easy enough to kind of get through. Then the last one that I've listened to an audiobook to completion is How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps the House by Cherry Jones. Now, before I even talk like anything about this book, I have to say I really think I lost out on the experience of the book because I didn't get on with the narrator of the book. I didn't actually think the narrator was bad, but like something about her voice, my brain found so easy to tune out. Like, she has a really melodic, soft voice, and I found myself, like, I had to replay the start 6 times to understand the beginning of the book, because I found it so easy to let my thoughts go away from it. And because it was an audiobook, what I didn't really want to do is just sit there and just listen and do nothing else. But if I tried to do anything else, even something that was like fairly straightforward, I was immediately gone from the story and I had to like really listen to it. I think if I was still doing my commute, probably commuting would have been a good time to listen to it, where the journey is really familiar and you can kind of listen more attentively. But trying to do it when I was like cleaning or cooking, it just didn't really work. I would say, like, broadly it's a story about domestic violence, but if I'm really honest, I don't even know if I could properly tell you the plot. I listened to all of it and I re-listened to a lot of it and I'm still struggling to get there. So I really don't feel like I can talk too much about that book because I really couldn't access it. Like, something about the narration style just didn't function for me, which is a shame. But I didn't, from what I was listening to and what I did get and the pieces of the story I could kind of put together, I was like, I don't know that I'm into it enough to buy it, to read it. So I think that's kind of the end of my experience with How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps the House, unfortunately. And then the next one I've already spoken about again, but this is Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. I really enjoyed this book, really glad to see it on the list. In brief, it is the description of a man who's transitioned to become a trans woman and detransitions, who is in a relationship with someone that he works with, and they get pregnant. And the story kind of starts there. So the story is around the decision that this man takes to go out and link back up with an ex-girlfriend of his who's also a trans woman and try to convince her and the person who is pregnant, the cis woman, to kind of have an unusual queer family dynamic where they raise the baby as a kind of group. I won't say too much more. I have spoken about this in more detail in a wrap up, but I really enjoyed the reading. I heard on What Page Pod that they said one of the reasons this feels so new is because we just haven't got enough trans stories yet. But it did feel so fresh and new and it was really enjoyable. So I'd definitely recommend it if you haven't picked this one up yet. Then the next one was The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. Again, I've spoken about this one in some more detail, so we'll just do a quick overview here. But this is the story about 2 girls who grow up in a family in this odd sort of town. So the town is like very colourist, basically, and the people who live in the town are all people of colour, but they're encouraged to have the lightest babies they can, would broadly be how I'd describe it. And there is a set of twins born, these 2 sisters, one of whom decides that she wants to go into the world to pass as a white woman, and the other woman ends up having a relationship with a very dark-skinned man and has a baby that is much darker than a lot of the babies in the place that she grew up. And we follow these 2 women's stories as they diverge. They don't talk to one another, they aren't connected with one another, and the kind of story of the town in which they grew up. I won't say too much more. I did like it. If you want to hear more, I'm pretty sure it's my February wrap-up that this one's in. Then next I have Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Jessie. Spoke about this one in my latest vlog. I really like this book. I think this is probably second on my list with Detransition Baby. Those are like probably my 2 favourites. Maybe, we'll see. Maybe one of my top 3 at the minute. And this is a story about a woman who is looking at the sort of pathways of addiction in mice. And so she's a scientist sort of working on this problem, but it's deeply connected with her personally, as her mother has depression and her brother, I can't remember if he was a younger brother or older brother, anyway her brother died from a heroin overdose following an addiction to prescription pain medication. And we also explore Gifty, the main character's relationship with religion throughout this book, from the kind of more traditional religion that she had, kind of based on doctrine and dogma and the rules around her religion, and her experience with spirituality as she's in older life. This book read really fast, and I just thought it was really well done. I felt like the writing was very clear and direct, and I really like that. I like it when it feels like there's just enough there that you get everything you want from it, but you're never feeling like you have to work through anything. It's a bit of a skill. So that's Transcendent Kingdom, top of my list. I want this one on the shortlist. Then the next one is Small Pleasures by Claire Chambers. And this was enjoyable. This was enjoyable in the same way that The Dawn French was, but I will keep this book. I did like this book. So this is about a newspaper reporter in the 50s who puts out a story about people who can have children. I can't remember what it's called. People, basically virgin births, people who can have children without having to have any intercourse. But she looks at it in animals. And she gets a letter from this woman who says, I had a virgin birth and I was confined to kind of like an old school hospital. Like she was confined like with people who were in iron lungs, people who had like severe illness, and they were there with nuns for long periods of time. And she reports that she got pregnant whilst inside that institution. And this book follows the reporter's investigation with the family, with the mother, the daughter, and the woman's husband, who is not the father of the child. So they weren't married when she was in the sanatorium when she was younger, and got married afterwards. But so it's mostly about the reporter kind of interacting with all these different people. The reporter herself has a very needy elderly mother who has sort of made herself housebound, and she's caring for her alongside that. It's very gentle, very nice. Yeah, I think this is the kind of book my mum would quite like, so maybe I'll get it for her next time. Maybe I'll just get it for her. Maybe I'll get it for her as a little present. Then the next one was Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshni. I didn't like this. I didn't like this one. I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it. Which is annoying because everyone kept telling me that they thought I was really going to like this book, and it just didn't vibe that much with me. It's about a woman who has a strained, is probably quite a diplomatic way of putting it, quite a strained relationship with her mother. Her mother can be quite abusive in what she's saying to her, but it seems like it's always quite subtle and like quite bitchy. And at the point at which we meet her, her mother has a mysterious illness. It's never really quite identified what it is, that is affecting her memory and affecting her sense of herself and where she is in the world. It feels a little bit like dementia, but the mother's very young and sort of all the doctors can't quite figure out what's happening, but they think it's just going to get worse. And this book shows the kind of reimagining of the relationship between these two women. Now that the mother has moved from being this sort of quite overpowering figure who enacts a lot of control and a lot of criticism in her daughter's life, to this almost like spectre of her mother who requires a lot of care but is still very cruel to her. I just didn't enjoy reading it that much. It was probably quite a good book. I didn't get much pleasure from it, and it's not necessarily just the subject matter, because I'm normally fine with reading stuff that's darker, but it just didn't feel like it fit with me that much. But that's not to say that other people wouldn't enjoy it. I do think it was well written. I thought it was an interesting premise, just didn't land. The next one was fine, like middling, and that was Raven Nalani, Raven Nalani's Luster. I spoke about this one already, I think in February, or maybe it was even January. And essentially this is a story about a younger woman who has an affair with an older man. And the kind of bit of this book that is more novel, I suppose, because you read a lot about that, is that the woman is black and the family that the man is within are white, but they have adopted, I think the girl might be mixed race. She's either mixed race or she is black. They've adopted a daughter who is like not fitting for them within the general theme of their family. The white mother's not really sure what to do with her. And some spoilers here, but I don't really know how else to describe this element of the novel, which is probably the most interesting part of it. But when the wife finds out about the affair, she is keen for our main character to stay within their life because of the impact she's having on their young daughter. And they almost form an alliance in the house. So that's kind of the unusual bit about it. But the whole young, like, ingenue has a relationship with an older man and likes some of the things they have, but ultimately they're gross. I've read that so many times that I just didn't find the other bits like had enough there. I've been more interested, I don't know, maybe if it's just a slightly different setup, but the setup felt so familiar. I think I was just like, yeah, whatever. And then the last one that I finished reading is Piranesi. I just finished this morning and I really liked this one. I think if I was trying to put a shortlist together from the ones I've read so far, I'd have Piranesi, Transcendent Kingdom, Detransition Baby, and then the others, whatever. Those are my three I'd want. Piranesi is very strange, and everyone has said it's very strange, so I'm going to try and speak to you a little bit about why it's strange. However, I really enjoyed the process of reading this with no context to what the strangeness was. So if you don't want to know anything about that and you're kind of good with this video, that's fine. I've got no more books to share. Go and enjoy your day. If you want to hear a little bit more about Piranesi to maybe kind of draw you in, if you're just like, it just sounds weird and I don't know anything about it, I'll tell you a little bit about it now. So we open the book with a man who is living in a very strange place. It is essentially a very large house with different parts of what we would consider the world on different floors. So there are floors that are made up of the ocean. There are floors in the centre which are broadly dry and accessible, but only have him, one other person who he calls other, and birds within them. There's no grass, trees, other animals. And the top floor is the sky, so that's where the rain comes from, that's where like weather is, winds are, and this man lives in this house. If you've read House of Leaves, this feels a bit like House of Leaves. I think that's one of the reasons that I really liked it, and if someone had described it like that to me, is like, oh, by the way, this book is like if you lived in the labyrinth in the House of Leaves, I'd have picked it up really fast, and I hadn't had that. So I wanted to share just a little bit about that. I won't go too much into it because the book fundamentally is kind of a puzzle. You have to start your way off not knowing very much about the world at all and work your way in and around it to understand it better. But it is a lovely little world that she makes. Whenever I read a book that's similar to this in some ways, I feel like I can almost get there. Like I feel like it might almost be real. I won't say too much because whilst, you know, I've said like a little bit of a spoiler. So whilst I've said like a little bit of a spoiler already, I think it's one to go and investigate for yourselves. It's a lovely little puzzle, mystery. I don't really know how else I could describe it. It's a little bit like when you're a child and you find a toy, or you go and, I don't know, like a doll's house you don't recognise as someone else's house, and you want to spend the time yourself looking through all the rooms and imagining what it looks like in there. So I don't want to do too much of that for you because I think part of the joy of it is reading it in that way. But I really liked it. It was very rewarding. So there you have it. These are the books that I've read so far. Ooh. From the Women's Prize list. The ones I have left, excluding The Golden Rule, are Nothing But Blue Sky, which I'm listening to an audiobook at the moment. That is my last Audible credit, very sadly. And I'm only about 20% of the way through that one. No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, which is on its way to me. I've ordered it from Amazon today. And Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller, which is also on its way. And then the other two I haven't read or bought yet is Summer by Ali Smith and Consent by Anna Leon. Summer, and Ali Smith and I in Summer, I'm like, it'll be fine, but I maybe won't love it, so I'm saving her till last. And Consent, nothing about it's like drawn me yet, so I'm just leaving Consent for the moment. but when I get to the last book, I'm pretty sure that'll be the last one that I read. The other thing is I'm going to get a new credit on Audible on the 6th, so what I might do is spend my last credit on Consent, so that I've then done all the books and I haven't had to spend money on any that, like spend money as in like buy a physical book for any that I'm not that sure about, because some I probably will like, I probably just won't love it. Yeah, so that's everything so far. So that's nearly the whole Women's Prize reviewed. There'll be one more video with what's left, and yeah, I might, if there's any others that are in there that I think need to be shortlisted, I will let you know, and I might do a little shortlist predictions. I might do it on Instagram maybe if I don't get time to film. But yeah, that's been my experience with the prize so far. Let me know if you've read any of these or you want to read any of these in the comments down below, and if you are trying to read along with the long list, let me know how far through you are. I'll see you guys again soon in my next video. Bye!